potato levy, an open conversation. This meeting is due to commence now, 1 o'clock, and is due to finish at 2 p.m. And the discussion is being recorded. At the moment, all attendees have been placed on mute. And as the session progresses, there are two ways in which you can ask a question during the discussion today. The first one is to use the event chat found on the right-hand side, on top right-hand side of your screen. You see the blue circle there, and you can simply type in a question there. And it will be asked as the conversation progresses. Secondly, you can raise your hand and the moderator will notify you when you're able to unmute. We will unmute you at that point. You will be able to unmute, you'll be able to ask your questions. If you're comfortable to do so, we ask that you share your camera during the meeting. It's very important to see friendly faces. And all questions from the discussion alongside any questions that haven't been answered will be included in our frequently asked questions and will be posted on the Ahdb website. We will also send round the frequently asked questions and the questions from today's session to all attendees at some point later on. Without too much of a to-do, I would like to introduce our panel today. And first, I would like to introduce the chair of Ahdb, and that is Nicholas Saphir.
Sorry, Patrick, I was having trouble finding the right button.
It's all new. It's all new to us.
No, yeah, it shouldn't be new to me. Okay, first of all, thank you all for coming. And for those of you who have been to either any of the town halls or any of the other discussions we've had, please bear with us. I think what we're going to do, because we assume that most people have been engaged in one way or another, we want to open up for questions, is we'll quickly whip through some of the slides. And then come on to the questions and answers. Just as a quick introduction to me, I started in business actually in the potato industry, built a public company in food and processing, as well as horticulture, farmed in places like Southern Africa, South America and Europe. I also chaired the organic milk producers for the last 18 years and built that into a business that exports to America and Australasia, China and Europe. So broad experience, including chairing and starting Food from Britain and the Agricultural Forum. I was asked by George Eustace and ministers both from Scotland and Wales at that time if I would come in and chair Ahdb last April, with a remit to bring about change, because the request for views had said two main things. One was, apart from 65% saying a levy was important, two main things were that our levy payer engagement, our conversations with levy payers were not transparent and open enough, and secondly, that we were bureaucratic and over expensive. Now, what did I find on coming in? I have to say that I have, as a levy payer, I was quite surprised at the things I didn't know were available and the things that emanated from Ahdb that I got advice on from my agronomists or generally read. So I think that I would say that it is for sure there is a lot going on in Ahdb which is of enormous value. But I also have to say that I think Ahdb has been bad at transparently engaging with levy payers. And I think it has been over bureaucratic and over expensive. And that's an open comment by me, which I'm quite happy for people to understand and to interrogate. So where have we got to? The board and the team have totally bought into all of the changes that are being made. We have a complete focus on cost savings. To do that effectively, and this is not about potatoes, this is right across the board. To do that effectively, we are moving from what has actually been a fixed levy for the last 12 and a half years to a zero-based budget for the future. It won't happen immediately, but will over the next year, which means that levy payers will be asked either through the sector boards or much more directly what programs are wanted. We will be totally transparent in costing them. Those costs will be interrogated, including overheads, and Alison will talk about that in a minute. We have got to have a different type of levy payer collection, because whether it be horticulture or potatoes or any other sector, To treat every sector as if they're all one is wrong. I mean, the difference between new potato growing and seed growing and processing of chips and crisps is quite different, and some of the expenditure that's needed is quite different. And then we will have a 5-year ballot, which will be in addition to the current ballot system, where the whole organisation will be held to task every 5 years. And I've actually recommended to ministers that that should take place on the 5th anniversary, starting on the 5th anniversary of the request for views, so in 2 years' time. So a lot going on in terms of change, a lot going on that quite understandably, when you talk to levy payers, they say, heard it before, now prove it. But we are doing just that, and we will do just that. We are focusing overall on 3 main areas: evidence and data, which is at the heart of where the future lies. For those sectors who want it, we will be very much involved in flying the British flag now that we're out of Europe, both at home and overseas, and improving performance, profitability and costs, again, on a sector by sector and group by group basis that I've explained on the zero budgeting approach. So a radical change in what we're doing. And that is not just because there was a horticulture and now a potato ballot, but also because that has to happen for the whole of HDB. So that's the overall, and what I'd like to do now is pass over to Alison to talk a bit about potatoes, and then Rob, and then we'll talk to questions and answers. So Alison, over to you.
Thank you, Nicholas, and good afternoon, everybody. Conscious that I'm something of a new face to most of you, so just very quickly to tell you that I joined the Potato Sector Board back in April 2019 and came in as an independent member with a marketing and commercial remit. Because I've had a career in food and drink industry. I then became interim chair in July of last year, so a bit of a baptism of fire. And although I'm not from the potato industry, I like to think that I bring a fresh pair of eyes and be a very keen listener to hear about the frustrations expressed by levy payers and what we as HDB need to do about that. In terms of the overall potato sector strategy, start with the top right-hand corner. We need to do a lot of work in terms of finding alternatives to disappearing chemistry, which is one of the many big challenges facing potato growers. And kind of 2 key areas with regard to that is over on the left-hand side. The first plank of the strategy is the recommendation to increase investment in research from seed right the way through to storage. So taking a much broader horizon in terms of thinking about starting point of seed through to novel agronomy and then through to storage itself. The second part of the strategy is around crop protection, and in particular giving better access to advice with regard to that. And then the third part of the strategy, bottom right, is around marketing, consumer campaigns, but also activity on exports, which Patrick, I'm delighted to say, is here and able to answer questions about that. Now, one of the key things, if you can have a look at the next chart, Patrick, is that people are always asking us about where the money gets spent. So this pie chart shows you in general terms where it goes. So again, top right-hand corner, you can see 28% going on research, and then another 17% on knowledge exchange, which is all about getting that research out to the front line where it can be put to good use. Bottom left-hand corner is marketing, everything from digital, website, etc., through to the export and market access, and then market development itself, which are the marketing campaigns. I would like to just shout out the 9% on market intelligence and analysis, and I know there's sometimes some challenges with regard to the data there, but without HDB, I think this is something, an area that would be sorely missed and the industry would be left to fly behind. Now, let's talk about the support costs. 19%, clearly too high. A lot of central costs in there to do with things like finance, legal, IT, all those things you need to be able to run a business. Actually, it is overstated at 19% because some of the costs in there should actually be redeployed into the other zones because they really relate to the actual delivery of potato-oriented programs. But nevertheless, as Nicholas has said, big change program coming, which will start with operational efficiency, reduction in headcount, and we should get to see that number come down for potatoes. So just very quickly then, before I think we're going to try and open it up for questions, final chart from me is just to be absolutely clear that people understand the significance of a yes versus a no vote. So if you vote no, That really means the end of a levy, and it will stop the research that we do, the consumer marketing and the export development, stop things like the Grow Your Own Potato campaign, and stop spot farms and other activities in terms of KE. What a yes vote does is it means that a levy would continue to be collected, and that will enable us to continue with programs around storage, around all the different activities in terms of research that we do. But it is also critically a vote for change. And we know that a lot of people, as Nicholas said, from requests for views and conversations we're having, you want to see a big programme of change, and that is what a yes vote will deliver. So I think at that point, Patrick, it's back to you, in fact, because we really want to get going with the questions.
Thank you, Alison. Yes, it's very important that we get on with the questions. Nicholas, I think this first question is really for you. We understand, and we're hearing from growers that they're having a really tough time at the moment through rising production costs, loss of chemistry, Brexit. You know, if we're talking about seed exporters, the weather, growing conditions, etc. It is a really difficult time for growers at the moment. And it's important to remind growers that AHDB is there to support them as well. But in your opinion, I mean, what is the role of AHDB to help growers move forward?
Yeah, pretty fundamental question. I mean, first of all, let me say that I think we all understand that potatoes and one or two other crops are having a really tough time, and it is a worrying time anyway. I mean, it's not just about potato growing. The uncertainty around the future of farm payments, the problem with seed potato Brexit, and not just seed potatoes for Brexit, but also we've just lived through the other problem of equivalence and alignment, and also at the end of the day the risk of a decline in consumption of potatoes, and so I think all of those things are real. What is the role of AHDB? Well, let's get it absolutely clear. The role of AHDB is to help the industry, potatoes, all horticulture and agriculture, where there is a market failure. So where there's a commercial solution to the issues, then AHDB does not really have a role. Where collectively growers coming together, farmers coming together, can invest in activities that can improve the industry, then AHDB has a role. So essentially, let's start from the top. There is no silver bullet. I mean, you know, I've heard seed potato growers say to me, "You're not lobbying enough to get seed potatoes onto the continent." Now, I have to say that it is for us to produce the evidence for government to make sure that we are pushing that message. But that's as far as we can go. We can't negotiate. We can't lobby. We talk to ministers. I had a conversation with both Scottish and English ministers over the last 10 days about the issue of seed potato exports. But it's for the unions to lobby, and it's for associations to lobby. We must be the independent voice providing information. And I think that if you listen to the noise coming out on seed potatoes, for example, where George Eustace said the other day it's about Brussels and alignment that's the problem. I think it is. I've lived through that on equivalence, on organics as well. But I think that where we can, our key role is to produce the evidence that allows people to make decisions. That's the first thing, an honest mirror to the industry. The second thing is that we are there to provide help and support in terms of research and development where that is not available commercially and would not be available commercially, because it isn't in the interest of commercial companies necessarily to deal with problems that are coming at us in terms of sustainability and environment. And I think a classic example of that is the reduction in chemistry. I think the third area is where there is also research and development that is not going to be done by anybody else, such as storage, where I think that if you take, for example, a conversation I had with McCain's just recently, where they said, even McCain's said that much of the research that we have done in terms of temperature controls on black heart have allowed them to change their whole storage mechanisms and the way they operate. So I think there are areas where the commercial world does not provide and will not provide enough answers, and that's our role. And the third area, for those who want it and not for everybody, is actually marketing support. So there were some areas, some parts of the potato world that say we don't need any of your marketing, we don't need any help. I would argue that actually it's pretty important to get a constant message out there that says potatoes are part of a balanced diet, and that the last 10, 15 years where we've seen lots of carbohydrate alternatives, the pastas, etc., the rices, it's important to have a voice out there for potatoes in general, not just for brands. And I think that's a role, and I think most definitely in exports, whether it be obviously seed potatoes or in certain areas where potatoes or processed potatoes, there is a role for us to play. And if anybody doubts that, have a look and see what's going on in other countries in terms of national export promotion for product. So I think that it's quite clear that if you start from the point of where there is no commercial activity that is of benefit, we have a role. Then I think much more important for the future has got to be that the industry has to decide what that role is. I think we've had too long where actually it's been determined, and it's been determined because there is a fixed levy, because there is a sum of money, and because actually at the end of the day we fail to recognise that some crops, potatoes is a good example, are not just one crop, they're many different things. So all of that has got to be changed to meet that opportunity.
Thank you, Nicholas. And just a reminder for anyone that's participating, there are two ways in which you can ask a question. You can either ask a question by posting it in the chat function and we can read it out, or alternatively, you can raise your hand. We'll give the option to unmute and you can ask the question directly. We already have a hand raised here from Sandy McGowan. So Sandy, if you bear with me, I will hopefully get a chance to unmute you and you can ask your question. Sorry, Sandy, the mute function seems to be blocked at the moment. While we try to resolve that, let me ask Nicholas another question.
Now, Patrick. Still
we can hear you now, Sandy.
Running now. Okay. Patrick, thanks. It's almost a two-pronged question. Nicholas and Alison, thanks for sort of the presentation and the discussion there. Just in terms of what you've presented here, one thing that was starkly missing from Alison's pie chart, for lack of a better description, was any reference to the spend on the seed sector. I'm a bit perplexed as to why that may be. I'm assuming it falls into the various different sectors within there, but given the audience today, I was hoping you could maybe elaborate a bit further on that. And regarding, Nicholas, the flying the flag abroad, and Patrick won't thank me for asking this because I'm going to start by saying that in personal terms and in my role at BPTA, we have been very delighted with the engagement that we've received with Patrick in his role since he took it on. But it has been something that has been sorely lacking, is engagement with stakeholders in industry. In terms of flying the flag for seed potatoes in particular, as you highlighted, Nicholas, and really, what change do you expect to see going forward, and how can we sort of take on board that is going to happen, given that this is a promise that has been made to levy payers a number of times already?
Alison, oh, sorry, Nicholas, on you go. Sorry,
I'm also having trouble with the mute button. Okay, let me leave seed to Alison. Although I have to say that you are right. It is part of all of those sectors. Whether we should separate it out for this particular meeting is an interesting question. But okay, coming on to flying the flag. Look, I think one of the problems. Remember, I started Food from Britain. And that's a long time ago now, but I started it with a fundamental belief that the future of British agriculture and horticulture did depend on a decent export industry. We culturally, Scotland and seed potatoes is one of the few examples that are different, but essentially we as a country have not been exporters, not compared with the Dutch and the Danes and the Germans. I mean, if I say to you, for example, forget seed potatoes for a second, on dairy, we export something like 0.9 billion of cheese, compared with the Dutch at 3.5 billion and the Germans at 4.5 billion. Actually, we're the 11th largest cheese exporter in the world after Belarus. So that says something about our culture. Whereas I think seed potatoes, we have been successful. You have been successful, but it could be a lot more. And I think one of the problems we have is that we have, not just as Ahdb, but in terms of DIT and government, we've actually seen agri-food exports as being comparatively unimportant. So we only have one commercial counsellor in any embassy anywhere in the world that actually focuses on agri-foods, and that's in Beijing, where we actually fund 80% of that person. If you notice, DIT announced last week they're now going to have 3 commercial counsellors in 3 selected markets. We have a team in Brussels that is partly to do with the politics of Brussels, and will clearly post-Brexit can switch off that activity and go purely for exports. We will put a lot more money and effort into exports, and that's not just about seed potatoes. That's right across the board, and it's not just about Patrick. So I think that by nature, by timing, by the way the events are going, exports will become a much bigger issue in the future of British agriculture. And I think that seed potatoes will play a significant role in that. But we need to fund it. We need to fund it with people overseas, not just here. And we need to have much more activity. And we will. My history tells me you will.
Shall I come in on the first part of your question then, which is with regard to expenditure, Derek, specifically on seed? You're right, I don't have a number on that, and I'm not sure whether we've got one immediately to hand, but just looking around that pie chart, it would be fair to say that the seed sector would benefit from programmes of work in R&D, which in turn also means it gets expenditure with regard to KE. Grow Your Own Potatoes is a specific campaign which again relates to starting off from seed and in children's education to understand where potatoes actually come from. And then of course a lot of the expenditure that goes on export development will be in support of the seed sector. So and there's also this whole point around whether actually the health of the seed sector is dependent on the robustness and the health of other sectors in the market. So indirectly, I could argue that the seed sector benefits from areas, like storage and other parts of even the other marketing campaigns. I think the other thing to say is that in the future, with the approach to budgeting, which is going to use this zero-based approach, where we'll be working collaboratively with levy payers to determine what programs of work the industry actually wants. There'll be the opportunity to decide how much goes specifically on seed, how much goes on specifically other sectors. And I think Nicholas said in one of his opening remarks is that although to an outsider, potatoes sound like pretty straightforward. Actually, there are all these subsectors with the industry with different priorities and different needs, and often quite conflicting opinion. So in the future, we need to work across the industry in a collaborative way to make sure that we're putting the expenditure where the industry wants it. So, but I mean, Rob may or may not want to add anything with regards specifically on the seed, but probably something you might have to come back on.
Yeah, I took a wager with Graham Nichols a week ago saying I think we're doing as much seed work as we were 10 years ago, but I still haven't proven it. Problem I've got is if I said we're doing a blackleg project, is that a seed project or is that a ware industry as the kind of beneficiaries? Is it their project? It's impossible to tell, but we can list out, there's work going on blackleg, there's the PCN land management issue, there's the transit work we've done on export joint with Scottish Government, there's the desiccation specifically for green seed crops, there's the aphid and virus stuff, there's the dedicated spot site that's a seed site now. So I think there's evidence that we do it. It's just we account for it. It either goes to a crop protection team or it goes to a marketing team or whatever, which is what Alison said. But I'm quite happy. I can take away as an action for this group. I can write all that up and just give you an estimate of what that looks like, just so everyone's clear.
Sam, did you have any further comments that you want to add?
If I'm still here, yeah. Well, to a certain extent, I guess you've tried to address my questions, but I'm not sure you've actually grasped what I was asking. The real point is that we are very aware of the importance of exports and to the seed industry and the wider ranging potato business. But seed ultimately is the starting point of the supply chain through the whole of the potato industry. So absolutely it falls within there. And I'm not looking for a justification nor a list of the projects that are undertaken, because it's wide ranging that's within it. But We are a developed seed export industry if we're going to go down that route, but it does make up 1/3 of what we produce in terms of seed potatoes in Scotland. So there is a wider ranging piece there in terms of the representation that we have at levy payer level, and how that is sort of disseminated and communicated out. And I think that's what's lacking. And sort of, Nicholas, with the greatest respect, yeah, absolutely, I respect massively what has been achieved through these different projects you've been involved in. But we are not a burgeoning industry. We are something that is developed, and we have market-leading businesses within certain sectors here that are already doing this. So it's not necessarily about exploring and developing something that is in terms of market failure. It's more about the support we need behind that. And I think to a certain extent, Ahdb almost shoots itself in the foot in its ability to support, given that you can't lobby, that you can't do certain things within government that us as commercial business can do. And that is perhaps what is now lacking, is that link we have with the likes of SASA and AFA and DEFRA to a certain extent, or the lack of, I should say. Anyway, that's my own thought process. Others may not agree with it.
Can I just come back on that, Sandy? Look, I think that the one thing quite a few of us are learning from this ballot process on potatoes is that the seed potato industry has a voice, and an important voice, that hasn't been heard well enough. That's true. I mean, Patrick clearly has a role in terms of export, but the one thing I would say to you is, do not get it wrong when asked the question, why don't you lobby on behalf of seed potatoes? For example, if you take the European situation, I think we ought to define what you mean by lobbying. I mean, I have personally spoken to 3 ministers on seed potatoes. Sorry about that. I have spoken to 3 ministers on the issue of seed potatoes recently. We are involved. We are producing the evidence around that. I think that doesn't stop you saying we don't lobby hard enough, but we do lobby. I think that what we need to do looking forward, I mean, the question for me is different. The question for me is, when you come on the other side of this ballot, what happens next if there is a yes? If there's a no, it's quite clear that the potato industry in Scotland will go off and try and do its own thing. Seed will try and do its own thing. I would argue that at the moment you get good value for money. I think that it'll cost you more to do the same again, but that's a separate issue. If the answer is yes, what happens the other side of the ballot? Well, I think what happens is we actually engage much more granularly with both horticulture and potatoes, actually. It doesn't apply in the same way to beef and lamb. And I think seed potatoes will become much more significant in terms of determining what it needs, rather than just being part of potatoes. And I think the same would be true of, for example, forgive me, the new potato industry that says actually we don't want to spend any money on storage. So I think all of that is going to have to tease itself out. But it's a question of how much you want to engage the other side of the levy in actually helping construct what I think has got to be a completely new approach to Ahdb's work.
Okay.
Thank you,
yeah,
Nicholas.
I mean, let's not. I'm not. We're not needing to drag into what has happened in the past, Nicholas. You're absolutely right. It's about what potentially happens after the ballot is taking place, and just for information, it wasn't that the Ahdb don't lobby. I am aware of the engagement with ministers. I deliberately didn't go down the EU route for the time being for a number of reasons, but. Yes, it is something that, depending on the outcome of the ballot, I think it needs addressed in terms of our development of our export industry, is the ability to engage more closely with government, as you cited, as other export development countries are doing.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thanks,
we'll
Patrick.
move on. We have another hand raised from Archie Gibson. Archie, I think you should be able to unmute yourself now and ask your question. Archie?
Got it now. Thank you. Thanks. So my question really is, in light of AFA's decision to only conduct one field crop inspection, growing crop inspection, this summer, citing issues around qualified staff, numbers, additional duties involved in the business of obviously imports and the movement of goods coming into the country. Can I ask what your view is on that, and why any developer, breeder, merchant, grower should have any confidence in product grown in England when it is quite clearly not in any way compatible to the more thorough and more comprehensive product that we can grow in Scotland? And my question really asks is, does DEFRA consider APHA a must go to organisation in order to get a feel for what levy payers might think about this, and indeed therefore the influence of APHA, of Ahdb potato to influence the decisions that are made in this sort of manner? So sorry, it's a slightly convoluted question, but it gets to the heart of confidence around quality of seed. Thank you.
Rob, do you want to go first, and then,
yes,
and then I'll come in afterwards?
I'm just going to kick in. Yeah, Archie. I think there's a level of interpretation here. So as I've understood it, when we had the virus forum a week ago, it was that APHA couldn't guarantee 2, not that they were only doing 1. And I think that was slightly different. And I think it's to do with the speed at which we come out of lockdown. And that was the indication made by APHA on the day, which they were away to check. And I think tonight's conversation that Boris is going to have with everybody might make that different again. So I think that there is that technical detail that's still to resolve. And I think when you get to the heart of the question and the interaction between Ahdb and APHA, it's an odd one for me to comment on, but I could recognise when that comment was made during the virus forum a week ago, I could recognise that some of our own personnel are under some restricted movement. So our storage network is victim to exactly the same issue at the moment, and we can't get people out on the ground in the way, so we can't guarantee, but we can commit, and we would like things to happen. So I perhaps had I had marginally more sympathy than anyone else for APHA on that issue. But I think the virus forum, we had very particularly constructed that around NFU, FPSA, BPTA, and all stakeholders being part of the family that arranged that, knowing that no single entity would have sort of the total airwaves with any of the ministries, the regulators, or the agencies that we were going to have to work with going forwards. And I think that was quite deliberate.
Let me just come in on a wider front on that one. The whole issue about assurance, alignment, certifications is very much up for discussion at the moment. I think that in conversations I've been having both with DEFRA and with DIT, and to a certain extent with Scotland, it is quite clear that reputation is absolutely central. And I think we're going to find much more engagement. Let's see over the next few weeks, but I think we're going to find much more engagement by government in this whole process of joined up writing across the board. And is AFA and it's available to APHA and its ability to certify absolutely critical? It is, because reputation's at the front of everything we're going to have to do, including what you do in Scotland. I mean, I'm not, you having an advantage over England because your certification is better than England's. It's not what I'm addressing. I mean, I think that it's a subject that is really significant across the whole of agriculture, and I think you're going to find alignment, certification, government funding in these areas is suddenly going to come to the fore. Whereas I think that they've been so engaged in purely dealing with Brexit that they've not really started to address this. I had a really interesting conversation last week about what are core activities that need to be done for the future of British agriculture and horticulture, and what is the role of government in funding some of that. Well, that conversation's never taken place before. So I think we're going to see changes, but you are right. Certification and alignment is absolutely critical in reputation.
Well, thank you both for that. I think, yeah, I'm pleased to hear what you say there, Nicholas, because it is fundamental to the UK's credibility as a seed producing nation, and we've got this protected status region. And I can comment that in my observation, there is a groundswell within the wider food industry within Scotland to push for dynamic alignment, despite the fact that is contrary to what UK Gov want to do for their reasons. Actually trying to split out the definition between substantive equivalence and dynamic alignment is a hard one, and the letter that came out from DEFRA last week gave us absolutely no clues as to how we might interpret that. So I have a degree of sympathy for the difficulties that AHDB find themselves in the wider context in that regard, but our industry will be undermined and undervalued at an international and export market level if AFA do not maintain a proper level of scrutiny on crops being grown south of the border. Bear in mind that one of the reasons why the English seed area has increased over recent years is because there is an argument amongst many of our customers, and there'll be representatives on this conference call today who can talk more eloquently on this subject than I, who believe that there are a certain degree of physiological aging, absolutely complements the input seed coming down from Scotland to give both processors and packers the quality of product they want, which competes directly and effectively with imports coming in from the continent. And I don't want to get dragged off in that direction. And the only other thing to say would be that along with the Department of International Trade, we've got Scottish Development International, and I would certainly commend as an organisation that to you. Food and Drink, Scotland Food and Drink have done very good work in getting people in consulates and embassies around the world, whether they're fish specialists or whiskey specialists or whatever they might be. And I would say, and I have been preaching clearly not to the converted for literally 4 years now about the need to make sure that our embassy officials and commercial people are aware of what it is we can offer from Scotland in terms of quality export seeds for export, sorry. Thanks very much.
I think, can I just pick that up again for a minute? Look, I think you've hit on a whole lot of things there, Archie, which are actually really very important. The argument about alignment and equivalence is going to go on, and specifically around Northern Ireland and all of those areas, let alone your exports into Europe. And I have been deeply engaged in that. I was actually deeply engaged in it in the American negotiations on one or two things in terms of equivalence. I'm not going to argue that case, because I think that that's a political case none of us can really influence. But given that alignment or equivalence will happen, then I think it is absolutely important that we actually have assurance behind that is credible. And it's not going to be, I won't get into the independence debate for obvious reasons today, but it's going to be really important that while we are all together, we have a reputation between us that is really credible, because we can taint each other in that sense. Your point about physiological aging, I have to say, having been a seed producer in Wales for many years, I probably, although I shouldn't say this, I probably agree that actually there is a physiological aging issue that's quite interesting there. But what I would say is that, yeah, whether it be Scotland with its own image, whether it be GB in total, we have to get out there. We have to talk about our quality, our reputation, and we shouldn't actually ignore the fact that parts of GB have got really good specialities and provenance that are different. So I'm all for that. I think it goes back to the heart of it. How much should AHDB be out there promoting the seed industry? I say we should be absolutely out there doing that, and we've got to increase the effort, and we've got to increase the spend. And I think it's not just about Patrick, who I think does a super job, but it is about actually having people on the ground. It is about getting out there into the marketplace. So going back to the point about, we are an established industry, and we need a different thing to maintain that, rather than you helping particularly in other areas. I think you're a development industry as well. I think there's potential. I think there's real potential, and we just got to get on with it.
Thanks, Nicholas. Just a reminder that you can either put your hand up to ask a question, or you can put your question into the chat, just like Alistair Melrose has done. So I'll go on to Alistair's question. Could I ask, what is the spend on external R&D, i.e. out with Sutton Bridge? Now, who would be best placed? Alison, are you able to take this one?
I think I know the answer, but Rob is a little bit closer to the detail. So Rob, can I pass this one to you? I've got my calculator here at the ready if you need me to do any of the maths. Jan, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Hi. Yeah. Okay. So we're on typical. Typically, we're at about 1.4 million across R&D, of which about 490,000 is our own levy-funded piece at Sutton Bridge. I need to go and fine-tune all of these. These were last year's numbers that I've still got in my head. So that's the R&D spend. But just to furnish that with a bit of the KE spend as well, because what we're now doing through the spot farms and through the development work that we've got in terms of the types of comparison is, you could argue that's closer to R&D than it is to communications in a sense. So you then add in that proportion of work that we do around the spot farms. There is something else happening here that I'm going to mention, Alistair, that might be interesting, is the relationship that we're developing with BBSRC, because it's always we've always recognised the challenge that we have to get to some of that fundamental research money if we're really going to make a big difference, and it's always been a challenge in the past to get there. And it was part of the old strategy. It just didn't work at all. We now have a full-time business development role within the technical team, whose role is to see if we can leverage, see if we can open up the BBSRC money as well. And the Blackleg project that's going on at the moment is a really, really good example where all of that comes from BBSRC. And then we fill in with the knowledge exchange piece as well. So I'm hoping in some way, I've gone way further than your question, Alistair. I hope that just helps paint a picture of where we're trying to get to in the future. So I don't want you to just think about that 1.4 million. I think it's a much bigger pot that we can start to exploit now that we're learning how to do it better.
Thanks, Rob. I'll go on to another question that's in the chat. Why do the speakers, and this is from Matthew Steele, what do the speakers see as the most effective way of marketing fresh potatoes going forward, i.e. television, social media, and why hasn't marketing been more prevalent thus far?
Well, I guess that'll be one for me to answer, at least initially. Well, first of all, to say that I strongly believe that Ahdb has a role in terms of marketing campaigns for potatoes. I mean, potato consumption had been in decline since the end of the Second World War until relatively recently. And certainly recent campaigns that Ahdb have done on behalf of levy payers have consistently shown great effectiveness and good return on the investment. I mean, the current campaign that we've got running out there at the moment is using social media for two reasons. First of all, the budget is modest, and there are parts of the industry who'd like to see us spending an awful lot more on marketing, but then there are other parts of the industry who think we shouldn't really be bothering with marketing. So the marketing budget always gets squeezed. But that's one of the reasons for using social media and not using television. But the other thing is that in these days, with the combination of the Kantar market research data we have, which gives great insight into different consumer groupings, meal occasion, all sorts of attitudes towards potatoes and other carbohydrates, enables us to target very specifically, and we can then apply that to social media. So, for example, we've got a campaign running at the moment, started at the beginning of February, focused around jacket potatoes under the banner of the new packed lunch, and we're able to put out different recipe messages to relevant audiences. So, for example, a recipe which has got a much healthier theme might go out to younger consumers, whereas one that's all about how to quickly produce a jacket potato with kind of classic favourites like baked potatoes and grated cheese will be going out to busy parents working from home. So I think there's a very real role for using social media, not just because budgets are low. And actually the days of doing big blanket television campaigns are probably not necessarily the smart way to go about when you've got tight budgets, because a lot of the money can kind of go to waste and not hit the relevant target audience. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I just reiterate that in the future, as we have more of a collaborative and two-way engagement with levy payers to determine what programs of work we want to develop on your behalf, that will decide whether we want to put more or less money into marketing.
Can I cut in on that one, just to Matthew, to give you a really practical example? The answer to your question changes each time the population moves on and does something different. So when we went into lockdown, then, to give you the real example, we spent money on catch-up TV and on magazines, because people were sat around, they were flicking through the channels, and they were reading more because they hadn't learned how to work from home. Okay. So that's where the spend went a year ago. Where it is at the moment, as Alison was saying, is all on the social channels with the right partners. Yeah, prevalence is a function of whether you're part of the target audience as well. So you might not always see what's going on. But I think the key here is that we're getting data all the time now that tells us which channel performs better than the other, and we're prepared to switch and move around quite quickly to get the most efficiency.
And just a comment there, just to say that to demonstrate the relevance of being able to target in this particular way, I think I'm right in saying that we actually trended in the 7th position on Twitter. Was it last week, or anyways, at the start of the campaign, because we generated a highly relevant conversation around how to cook jacket potatoes. I think that's pretty impressive when you've got noise coming from, well, no longer, but Donald Trump and Boris and goodness knows who else. So it just goes to show how effective we can be with this more targeted approach.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you, Rob. On to the next question from Gemma Mackenzie. Is there a concern at Ahdb that if potato growers vote against keeping the levy, that the organisation could be at a threat of collapse? Does the potential loss of 2 levy-paying sectors spark fears that other sectors will go down a similar route?
Okay, so look, this is about potatoes, and I'd like to focus on that, but I'm going to answer that question fairly fully because I think it's important we understand the difference. If you take beef and lamb, pork, dairy, cereals, the answer is, and I'm not being complacent, the answer is no. Potatoes and horticulture are about 20% of the total of Ahdb, and they are different from the others for several reasons. One key reason is because all of you involved in the industry actually either sign off or pay a check for Ahdb, whereas for the other sectors, it is actually a headage payment, and it goes out throughout the year, and actually people generally just accept it. So I think there is a different perception at the cost. I'm not being judgmental about that. I think the other point is that if I take just taking each one of them, beef and lamb are really focused, very, very, very focused on reputational work and exports. Pork is very focused on exports and endemic disease. Dairy is focused on productivity, marketing and export, and cereals about the recommended list and chemistry. So each one of them has a very simple, in comparative terms, simple view of what Ahdb provides. And as I said, not being complacent, at this moment in time, I don't think there is any risk to them not accepting, not valuing the work that Ahdb does, subject to better value and less bureaucracy, which is what we're engaged on. As far as potatoes and horticulture are concerned, I have a different view. I think that, look, without potatoes and horticulture, there will be a big hole, a 20% hole in what Ahdb does, and the repercussions in terms of the workload, the staff, and all of that is significant, but it can be handled. I think I have a deep worry personally that if Ahdb ceases to provide a potato and horticultural service in total, then I'm not sure I see anything that will replace it in any way that will make up for that disappearance. And I hear people say, that people will gather together, there will be voluntary payments, voluntary contributions, or the devolved authority Scotland would actually put together something like quality meats. I have to say, I think that if I look at the money that is spent, that much of that work will disappear, and then I think both potatoes and horticulture will suffer greatly. And I care about that because actually that's my background, that's where I come from. But I think that going to the question, will Ahdb suffer terminal decline because of the loss of potatoes and horticulture? No, it won't. That's not the issue. It'll be traumatic, but it won't suffer terminal decline.
Thank you, Nicholas. Maybe a question for Rob and Claire at this point. Does the work being carried out at the spot farms really have value to levy payers, and does it relate to their businesses and the challenges and issues that they may face? Rob, do you maybe want to start with that?
Well, I'll kick off, and then Claire can give some practical examples to what I'm saying. But we've constructed each of those with a steering group that helps decide what it is levy payers see. And the reason for doing that is we wanted to make sure we've got the end market represented, and we also wanted to make sure we've got the locality represented. Then we've got our own people in there making sure they understand the pipeline of the research that's come through, which was sort of consulted on with growers. So it's highly likely that through that combination, you've got one or more routes in to the right piece of work at the right time. Now, it would be so nice to have 10 times as many sites with 10 times as many things going on, but we've got to be quite efficient in how we do it. And I guess as well, if somebody's feeling their nearest site is less relevant, what we've done this year with digital and being able to move information around the country, I think gives you access to what's happening on all the sites. So I wonder, Claire, that's probably a good time to hand over and do some of the practicalities.
Yeah, I suppose like the spot farms is something I'm really proud of, and I think Scottish farmers should be pretty proud of it, because we really used the Bruce Farm site as being a kind of a run of the concept. We got Scottish Government funding to put it into place so we could do some different things, and really it became all about being led by the farmers and being able to find things that farmers actually wanted to see in the field. And we really worked so closely with Bartlett to pack out figures, stopping. It's not about what, it was great working with Jeff Bruce. He didn't want canes all over the field, and he didn't want significant difference. He wanted how much money is going to be in my pocket at the end of this, and we really pushed that whole concept, and the whole of Ahdb took that on board across cereals as well. And it's really something that the whole organisation is looking at. It comes to bottom line and figures back to farmers. It's not about significant difference and marginal differences. Obviously those are really important, but when it comes to running a potato enterprise, you need money in your pocket. So Bruce Farms was brilliant, and it was always something that I was really concerned about, is that we weren't delivering to the seed industry. And so we've got the programme now working with McCain and Jim Reid, and it's phenomenal, and I hope that it does serve the seed industry in terms of kind of dealing with the issues. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had this session with the strategic spot host farmers across the country, and it's amazing when we get those 3 guys together and start talking about desiccation. We talk about cultivations. We really try and get into the aphid and virus issues as well, because it's a big issue across England and Scotland, and how do we work together collaboratively to reduce the impact of the whole industry, and also make sure that commercial assets and kind of, again, what's in your pocket at the end of the day, how does that work? So I'm really proud of how the spot farms work. I appreciate that sometimes they don't deliver everything to every business, but I just kind of encourage you to get involved and be part of it, because I do think we can answer more questions, and we're always hungry for more information as an industry.
Rob, Claire, thank you very much. Nicholas, I'm conscious of the time. We've just got under 5 minutes of the session left. Maybe I could pass over to you to provide any sort of summary of the discussion, any closing comments you would like to add at this point?
Well, all I would say is that we are clearly facing a ballot, and that's significant. I hope that we get the message out, two messages. One is that actually there is a lot of work going on that's really significant, and that much of it will be at risk, whatever happens if we don't have a yes vote, and that it won't be replaced. And I think that would be very unfortunate. The other thing is, probably more important to me, is that we are here listening. We really are listening, and I think that we need to close the gap between what Patrick and Claire and people on the ground are doing and the way in which the organisation operates. I think it's been overstructured. I think it's bureaucratic. I think it has to be really changed quite fundamentally. And I think we are actually engaged in that process. And I would just ask the industry, potato industry, to recognise those changes that are taking place. I think one of the things we learned from the horticultural vote, and you know, it was one levy payer, one vote, so we'll see the result come through, and the ministers will have to decide what to do about it. But the one thing we will have to learn is that that if you look at the yes vote, by and large, it was the more advanced farmers and growers who were really engaged in the work that Ahdb does. And I think we've seen that in the town hall meetings and these meetings, that actually there's a whole lot of farmers and growers out there who we don't engage with. And when it comes to ballots, etc., then that really does have an effect. So I think we've got a lot to learn. I think we've got a lot to do in terms of cost reduction, bureaucracy, etc. And I think we've got to do better on engagement. So I just hope we get to the other side of the ballot and we can start delivering and making these things happen. So I think that's me, Patrick.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that pretty much, in the absence of any further questions or hands coming up, it really just takes me to wrap up the meeting, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. A feedback form will be emailed to you straight after this meeting from the events team. So please take a moment to complete the form and ensure that we can improve these events as we move forward. As we say, this was a bit of a trial event and a slightly different take on the town hall meetings that have taken place. As I've already mentioned, all questions either answered or unanswered from today's meeting will be responded to and posted out in a frequently asked questions style document to all attendees, and the link will be included in the follow-up email from the events team. So without further ado, I'd like to thank you for attending this meeting and wish you to enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.